in a time when engines weren't just machines, they were legends. You could fix with your own hands. America built its world on the roar of Detroit diesel, 8V71s, Ford Flathead 5.8s, Mack Thermodynes, and Cummins N14s. But that era of real power vanished almost overnight, swept away by laws, oil shocks, and the silent logic of computers. Why did a nation known for overbuilt strength abandon the machines that defined its greatness? And what did we lose when the heartbeats of industry fell silent? The answers may make you rethink everything you know about how power is built and why it matters. The Detroit Diesel 8571 was never just an engine. It was a blueprint for how American machines were built to endure. Each one began with a block of cast iron, thick enough to shrug off decades of vibration and heat. Inside, every cylinder liner could be pulled and replaced right in the field, using nothing more than a liner puller and a set of wrenches. Mechanics didn't need a computer or a factory technician. The parts were modular, designed to come apart as easily as they went together. Injector racks ran across the top, each injector held in place by a handful of bolts. If one failed, it could be swapped in minutes without disturbing the rest of the engine. The same went for blowers, turbos, and water pumps, each a self-contained unit, bolted on and ready to be removed when needed. Fasteners were standardized, almost always in familiar SAE sizes. A mechanic's toolbox held everything needed to strip the engine down to its bones. Service manuals from the factory laid out every step, with clear diagrams and torque specifications. Even the most intimidating repairs, like pulling a piston or replacing a camshaft, could be done on the side of a highway or in a barn, far from any dealership. The philosophy was simple. If it broke, you fixed it where it sat. There was no need for sealed modules or proprietary tools. Parts interchangeability was built into the DNA of these machines. Cylinder liners, bearings, and injectors were shared across dozens of engine variants. A part from a 6V71 might fit a 12V71 with barely a change. This made it possible to keep trucks, tractors, and generators running for generations, even as the world around them changed. Mechanics learned to trust what they could see and touch. A strange noise or a change in vibration meant something specific: a worn bearing, a misfiring injector, a blower needing attention. The machine spoke a language anyone with experience could understand. This approach went beyond the engine itself. Service panels were big enough for adult hands, not just for assembly line robots. Deck plates could be lifted to reveal everything important, and nothing was buried behind electronics or plastic covers. The 8V71 was more than a product. It was a promise. If you put in the work, it would keep going. That's why these engines became legends. Not because they were flawless, but because they were honest, and they were built to be rebuilt. If you're enjoying what you've seen so far, I hope you'll consider subscribing. It helps me preserve the history of these remarkable machines for future generations. Now, let's continue. The result was a kind of mechanical democracy. Anyone with the right tools and the will to learn could keep the heart of a machine beating for decades. Long before the first rays of sunlight crept over the factory roof, the shop floor was already alive. The day began with a ritual, a chorus of engine coughs and metallic clatter as foremen walked the rows, turning keys, listening for the right note. In those early hours, the sound of a Detroit diesel firing up was more than a sign of work. It was a heartbeat that set the pace for everyone inside. Each machine had its own distinct voice, a rhythm that echoed through concrete and steel. The vibrations traveled up your boots, through your legs, and into your bones. For the men and women on the line, these sounds were as familiar as their own breathing. A retired plant foreman once described it like this: "You could close your eyes and know who was running what, just by the way the floor shook." The 8V71 had a bark. The old Mack Thermodyne was more of a growl, and the generator room had the steady, deep thrum that never let up. He remembered how, fresh out of high school, he was paired with an older mechanic for his first week. Apprenticeship wasn't just about learning torque specs or part numbers. It was about tuning your senses. You learned to pick out the difference between a healthy whine and a bearing about to go. If a machine knocked at idle, you didn't need a manual. You needed a story from someone who'd heard it before. Mentorship on the shop floor was a rite of passage. The older hands passed down not just skills, but a way of listening. They taught the meaning behind every hiss, rattle, and pop. A good mechanic could walk the length of the building, eyes closed, and tell you which engine needed attention. The air itself carried the scent of oil, hot coolant, and steel, a blend that clung to clothes and skin long after the shift ended. In the generator rooms, the cadence of pistons and the pulse of exhaust valves created a backdrop for quiet conversations and quick jokes. The machines were loud, but they never drowned out the sense of camaraderie. Breaks were spent with thermoses balanced on toolboxes, stories traded over the din. Someone always had a tale about a stubborn tractor that refused to start at dawn, or a midnight repair that saved a whole shift from going dark. These weren't just stories, they were lessons, passed down in the language of sound and touch. The pride came not from perfection, but from knowing you could coax life back into iron and fuel with nothing more than patience and a socket set. For those who lived it, the memory of those days is vivid. The machines didn't just fill the air with noise, they filled the shop with purpose. Every vibration, every echo off the cinder block walls tied people together in a shared craft. The soundscape of work was more than background. It was identity. Apprentices became veterans, and the rituals continued, each generation learning to read the language of real power. In 1970, Congress passed the Clean Air Act, setting the stage for a battle between industry and regulation that would reshape American machines. For the first time, federal law imposed strict limits on what engines could put into the air. Carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter all faced hard caps. The numbers were daunting. Diesel engines that once belched thick plumes now had to meet targets like 40 grams of carbon monoxide and 16 grams of hydrocarbons, plus nitrogen oxides per brake horsepower hour. By 1991, particulate standards tightened to 0.25 grams, and just 3 years later, the bar dropped to 0.10. Each new rule forced engineers to rethink everything about how engines burned fuel and handled exhaust. Compliance wasn't optional. The Environmental Protection Agency tracked every manufacturer, demanding data and threatening heavy fines for violations. Internal memos from the late 1970s reveal a sense of urgency and frustration. Companies like Caterpillar and Cummins lobbied for delays, warning that meeting the new standards would require massive investments in research and development. For Detroit Diesel, the numbers told a hard truth. The Series 71 and 92 engines, with their simple two-stroke design, could not be cleaned up without losing the very qualities that made them legendary. The EPA's own forecast predicted that compliance would add thousands of dollars to the cost of every heavy-duty truck, not just in new parts, but in warranty claims and recalls, as untested emission systems hit the road. While engineers wrestled with emissions, another crisis struck. The oil embargo of 1973 sent fuel prices soaring overnight, exposing the hunger of American machines for cheap diesel and gasoline. Truck stops rationed fuel, lines stretched for blocks, and boardrooms filled with urgent meetings. By 1979, another spike doubled down on the pain, pushing the price of crude oil from $3 to over $30 a barrel in less than a decade. The math was brutal. Running a cross-country rig or a construction fleet suddenly cost 2 or 3 times as much. Manufacturers scrambled to downsize engines, swap out heavy cast iron for aluminum and composites, and chase every possible efficiency gain. The Clean Air Act and oil shocks didn't just change the rules, they made them non-negotiable. Every new truck, tractor, and bulldozer had to be cleaner and cheaper to run, or it couldn't be sold. Engineering teams faced impossible trade-offs. Keep the power and fixability that drivers trusted, or meet federal standards and stay in business. Cost models from the era show the impact. By the late 1980s, each new emissions or fuel-saving technology added thousands to the sticker price. The old philosophy of overbuilding gave way to a new reality of regulatory deadlines and economic pressure. The machines that once seemed timeless now faced a countdown, driven by forces far beyond the shop floor. Inside Detroit Diesel's headquarters in early 1990, the mood was brittle. Engineers and managers crowded into a boardroom, Stacks of regulatory filings and cost projections spread across the table. The meeting began with a single sheet of paper, an internal memo outlining the company's new direction. The message was clear. The two-stroke engines that built the company's reputation would not survive the next round of emissions deadlines. Electronic controls and four-stroke platforms would replace them. For the men and women who had spent decades perfecting the art of mechanical reliability, it felt like a betrayal. One engineer, voice tight with frustration, broke the silence. "If you remove the noise, you're removing the soul." The words hung in the air, echoing against the glass and steel. Management responded with numbers: projected fines, compliance costs, warranty risks. There was no room for sentiment. The Clean Air Act's latest amendments left no margin for delay. The board's final word: adapt or be left behind. Whistleblower accounts from that week describe a sharp divide. Some engineers argued that the new engines, with their sealed modules and digital controls, would alienate loyal customers and erase a generation of skills. Others, worn down by years of regulatory battles, sat in silence. One recalled, "It was like watching a funeral for everything we believed in." The shop floor, usually alive with banter and the clang of tools, fell quiet. Mechanics gathered in small groups, reading the memo over coffee, trading rumors about layoffs and retraining. The sense of purpose that once filled the plant seemed to drain away overnight. Internal documents from those days reveal the scale of the decision. The company projected millions in upfront costs to retool assembly lines and retrain staff. Warranty models predicted a spike in claims as new electronic systems rolled out untested. The old guard, who could rebuild a 71 series engine blindfolded, faced a future where repairs meant swapping out sealed boxes and reading error codes. A culture built on hands-on knowledge and trust in steel was being replaced by a world of compliance checklists and software updates. The emotional cost was harder to measure. Apprenticeship programs were put on hold, tool cribs filled with unused specialty wrenches. One senior mechanic, nearing retirement, wrote in his logbook, "We used to build engines you could fix with a handshake and a promise. Now you need a password." As the meeting ended, the boardroom emptied in silence. For those who stayed behind, staring at the memo taped to the door, the message was inescapable. The era of mechanical craft had reached its breaking point. What began as a fight to preserve the old ways ended with a mandate. Real power would now answer to regulators, not to the men who built it. By the mid-1980s, the sound of a mechanic's stethoscope against a valve cover was being replaced by the quiet click of a laptop keyboard. Electronic control units, ECUs, arrived on shop floors, bringing a new language of sensors and software. Where a seasoned technician once listened for a misfire or felt for a vibration, now a diagnostic code flashed on a screen. Faults that used to announce themselves in smoke or rattle were buried in lines of data. The art of listening, learned over decades, faded almost overnight. Union records from 1982 to 1995 tell the story in numbers. Diesel apprenticeship programs shrank by more than a third. Manuals that once taught how to set injector racks or adjust valves gave way to flowcharts for troubleshooting wiring harnesses. A senior technician from Joliet remembered, "You used to train your ear. Now you're training your thumb to scroll through menus." The change was swift and unforgiving. Shops that had run on sweat and experience found themselves reorganized around diagnostic bays and proprietary software. Repair jobs that once demanded patience and touch now required passwords and updates. For many, it felt like the machine had stopped speaking their language. The bond between man and engine, forged in grease and noise, was reduced to a digital readout. The skills that built careers, reading the story in a bearings wear, fixing a fuel rack by feel, became obsolete in the span of a single generation. In the early 2000s, a new kind of workshop began to appear. Not in garages or barns, but on internet forums and video channels. People who grew up with the sound of big diesels and the smell of gear oil found each other online, swapping stories and advice across thousands of miles. One YouTuber, sleeves rolled up and hands stained black, summed it up. "A Detroit diesel never apologizes. It rattles, it smokes, but it's honest. You fix it, it runs, and everyone knows you did it." Restoration culture became a movement. Facebook groups and message boards tracked down rare injectors, rebuilt water pumps, and celebrated every first start. Tractor shows filled county fairgrounds, the crowd pressing in when a 50-year-old engine finally fired. In Iowa, a 1957 Caterpillar D9 bulldozer is still working snow each winter, its fifth owner proud to say, "It never quits if you don't quit." The machine's logbook lists a new transmission in 1976, an engine overhaul in 1982, and a home-welded blade in 1998. Each repair is a chapter, each owner a caretaker. Even memories of resistance have become legend. During the 1979 trucker blockade, convoys of old Detroit diesel rigs lined the highways, some idling for days, while their drivers fixed them on the spot. It wasn't just protest, it was proof that these machines, and the people who kept them going, refused to fade quietly. Today, every rebuilt engine, every shared manual, is another spark, keeping that fire alive. In 1965, over 90% of American heavy-duty trucks used engines that could be fully rebuilt with basic hand tools. By 2000, that number had dropped below 20%, according to Department of Labor and Manufacturer records. The evidence is clear. Regulatory laws like the Clean Air Act, rising fuel costs, and corporate mandates forced a shift from overbuilt, serviceable machines to lighter, more complex designs. Documents from the 1990 Detroit Diesel Board meeting confirmed that this transition was not only technological, but cultural, marking the end of an era when mechanics and workers shaped machines with their own hands. What remains unknown are the long-term effects of losing this hands-on expertise, as apprenticeship rates fell by 35% in 2 decades. Today, the restoration of vintage engines and survival of machines like the 1957 Caterpillar D9 show that craftsmanship endures, even as the industry changes. The record proves progress delivers efficiency, but it also redefines the meaning of power, and what is lost cannot always be replaced. Thank you for watching. If you had the chance to work on one of these, or if you remember hearing that distinctive sound, I'd be genuinely interested to hear your story in the comments. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please do subscribe. There's much more to come.